Today is Monday, July 14th, 2025. I have 2.5 years to run under 2:16 in the marathon in order to qualify for the 2028 Olympic Trials Marathon, and I'm not even close. Back in May of 2024, last year, a little over a year ago, I publicly announced that I was making a comeback to running. I had kind of finally started feeling like things were moving in a good direction for me, for health-wise, and felt more comfortable, even though it still felt a little uncomfortable, still felt a little scary, felt a little bit more comfortable saying, this is this huge goal that I have, this is what I want to do, and made a video about it, put it out there, and at that time, things were going pretty well. Really, like last summer, on the whole, things were going reasonably well. And unfortunately, I think the reality looking back is that I was on several different medications last summer for a period of time. And I think the unfortunate reality is that those medications were definitely kind of propping me up. Maybe some of you have felt that way before, where you take a medication and yes, it makes you feel better, but the reality is that it's not fixing the root of the problem. And I think, unfortunately, that wound up being the case for me, because once I went off those medications, things just started to get a lot worse. So once I went off those meds, and I tapered gradually, but I really started to see how much they had been propping me up, how much of the good feeling that I had, the lower symptoms and being able to train, everything was just kind of propped up by medications. So unfortunately, as always, so many of those medications have long-term consequences, long-term issues that I didn't want to run into. I started running into already and did not want to run into any further. Didn't want to totally entrench myself in those. But the big thing I had found diet-wise, I've tried 100 different ways of eating over the last 10, 15 years, trying to kind of figure out what works best for my body. Both because I like tinkering, I like experimenting, and also just because I'm desperate, trying to figure out what works. And one thing that I started to find is that every time I would lower carbs, I would feel a little bit better. I would get a little bit lower symptoms. My calf and Achilles problems, which are definitely related to everything else that's going on, would improve, would get better. And so, I'm gonna get some eye rolls here, but in January of this year, 2025, I decided to go on the carnivore diet. So that means meat only, basically mostly red meat, no carbs at all, 0 plants, 0 carbs. And fascinatingly, things actually got a lot better. I was able to train. I was able to pretty much live mostly normally, like especially after the first couple weeks where you're kind of adjusting. Like 3 to 4 weeks in, I was like, not gonna lie, I thought I had it figured out, man. I thought I had unlocked a secret that just nobody else knew but me. I was training really pretty reasonably well. I built up I think my peak in April, I ran like a 60-mile week. Like, that's massive. I know that's not where you need to be to run a 2:15 marathon, but that's huge relative to what I've been doing. What was it, 2024? I averaged like 20 miles a week. So anyway, the carnivore experiment honestly seemed like it was going really well until it didn't. I started to develop a few symptoms that were interesting and I think are very relevant. One being, I've kind of struggled with somewhat dry eyes for a long time, but I started to not just get dry eyes, but like red eyes. You might even see it still probably is a little bit right now. It feels pretty good, but it's a little red. And I started to not be able to wear my contacts for more than like 2 hours a day. Like, that's it. That's the most that I could wear my contacts, was like basically when I ran. And then I would take them out and have to wear glasses the rest of the day. And even then my eyes would be like, especially my left eye, would be like blood red. I started to have, I feel like energy-wise, I was like stable, but I was flat, if that makes sense. Like, I wasn't crashing in like barely, like kind of like my classic crash where I have to just like lay back on the couch or in bed, close my eyes and just like not have any stimuli. I didn't have any of that. But I also didn't feel that good either, if that makes sense. Like, I didn't really have, I just felt very flat and almost like zombie-like in a way. Almost zombie-like, if I can describe it. And that on top of really just, I think unfortunately in general, what happened was it just started to fall apart. Like the carnivore diet started to fall apart. I was kind of a mishmash of words coming out of my fucking mouth, but basically it just started to fall apart. And you know, the calf and Achilles stuff kind of started to come back. And I eventually, basically mid-April, here's to say, in mid-April I decided to quit the carnivore diet, stop that, add carbs back in, add fiber back in. And, you know, right away, like the bowels improved, I'll tell you that much. But unfortunately, kind of all my symptoms just sort of came raging back. Clearly, I had developed, unfortunately, some new ones even. And I think looking back, I think what happened was that I developed like even further liver problems. But even without drinking any alcohol while on the carnivore diet, which kind of shows, you know, non-alcoholic, that's why they call it non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. What I realized after going off the carnivore diet was that I think what the carnivore diet does, this is just my theory, you know, based on kind of what I've read and how my own experience went. I think what the carnivore diet did for me is it kind of acted like a steroid. You know, if you have like eczema or some sort of skin problem and you take prednisone, it jacks up your cortisol, which then lowers your immune system response. So you think, wow, I'm healed, like I don't have eczema anymore. The reality is that your body's immune response, which creates the eczema in response to something else, a deeper root problem, just shuts off. So you're not really healed. You're not actually any better. You're just not experiencing the symptom. I think the reality is, I think lowering carbs and ultimately going on, you know, a zero carb diet, I think that's what that did for me, is it shut off the immune system. So you think, I'm healed, I did it, man, I'm fixed. And the reality is that your immune system is just shut off and your body's in absolute turmoil. You're developing fatty liver and on and on and on. So I know I'm gonna get people, some of you watching this, I have a great viewership, what am I talking about? But maybe the occasional person will watch this and be like, you moron, you did the carnivore diet. Dude, let me like be 100% clear. This was out of desperation, not because I read some asshole online say that you should only eat beef or whatever. Like, this was out of absolute desperation, given kind of where my situation has gone. And again, like I said, it ostensibly on the surface, it did kind of work. My training was really not bad. I'm not gonna say it was like killer, but it really wasn't bad. I did some workouts. I did, you know, some like mild, very, very light threshold work. I was very nervous about stepping into any speed work, really. I was very nervous about getting too intense with that. So I really kept it to mostly easy running, but, you know, started working in some light threshold work and it was going pretty well, man. Like, you know, 7 times a mile at like, well, the funny thing was my treadmill, I got it adjusted like last year, or had to replace the belt, replace the deck. And when he calibrated it, he definitely calibrated it wrong because I right away was like, this is off. I thought based on running outside, based on my own perception, I thought it was like a minute per mile slow. And actually I went and did like I put like a piece of tape on it, recorded it, used like exact time frame on a video and looked at like plugged in, you know, the pace of the treadmill to determine exactly what the speed is. It's more like 30 seconds off. So anyway, that's all to say, I was doing mile repeats at like, I don't know, 6:30 pace. I know that sounds slow as shit, but the reality was it was easy. Like, I was like, oh my God, I could do these all day. So that was kind of how I felt on the carnivore diet. I'll talk about that in another video about like really how that experience went. The big thing to say is that I think the reality was that similar to medications, it was just kind of propping me up. Like it was hiding the problem in order to make you feel better temporarily, and it just didn't last. You know, I've been hesitant to really talk about exactly what is going on with me on here, and that's for a couple reasons. One is that I don't know exactly, but two is because I don't like to, I don't know, it feels very whiny and sappy. Even this right here feels a little bit like whiny and, you know, look at me, like you should feel bad for me. Like that's not what I mean to do here. But the reality is that I have some sort of autoimmune condition. I don't know what it is. Doctors don't really know what it is. You know, I was treated for Lyme disease in 2016, 17, and 19. And at the time I had, if anyone who's familiar with Lyme disease, there's this one biomarker, it's called your CD57 natural killer cells. It's kind of like people with like HIV AIDS, like they look at T cells as kind of like your marker of recovery. As those go up, you're getting healthier. CD57s are similar with Lyme. They're not a perfect diagnosis of Lyme, but they're an indicator of your recovery from it. So they need, in order to diagnose it, they need low CD57 score and another, positive test. So when we first discovered that I had Lyme disease, my CD57s, well, let me tell you, CD57s are in a healthy person are over 200, should be over 200. Anything under 100 indicates likely Lyme disease. Anything under 60 indicates like you've had it for a while, your immune, your natural killer cells have like died, you're in a rough spot. Anything under 20 is severe illness, very serious. Mine was 13 when we first tested it. One of the lowest my doctor had ever seen. And so anyway, after those first two big rounds of treatment, 2016, 2017, we got it up to like 30 something, 35 maybe. And then in 2019, I think I tested it last time in like 2023, it was like 65. So definitely a lot better, and like indicates that there's almost certainly not like an active Lyme infection going on. It's not like I'm sitting here dealing with this active, infection, whatever. But it's not, over 100 is good, over 200 is ideal. So that's all to say that it indicates that there's just some sort of immune dysregulation going on with that sort of number. So that's one thing. Second thing is I was on a drug called Prevacid, which is a acid suppressant, acid blocker, now over the counter, a very popular drug. I was on that for almost 10 years, which is not good. If you go buy one at the store, which again, it's over the counter now, you get 14 days worth, and it tells you, do not take this any longer than 14 days. It is meant to be used short term, and unfortunately, it was prescribed like candy back in the, I think it was 2007 or so I was prescribed it, and took it every day for, again, about 10 years. And unfortunately, that can cause a lot of long-term issues. That's just kind of the reality, is that, the human body is very, very adaptable, very capable of fixing itself. And yet sometimes maybe the reality is that there are things that happen, and things that unfortunately modern medicine and modern science does, that can't be fixed, that can't really be repaired. I'm not saying that's my situation. It's just saying that sometimes there's stuff you just shouldn't fuck with, from a health perspective. And it's unfortunately, I was on that for a long time. Led to, I had some very, very intense gastritis. I have a mucosal mass in my stomach. Benign last we checked, but very, very, very scary. So anyway, that's kind of just like the backdrop, the background of sort of what's gone on throughout my life that's kind of led to where I'm at now, 35 years old. Just sort of still having these chronic problems. To bring you back to now, the last few months have been pretty rough. After I got off the carnivore diet, I think, at first my thinking was, because I added carbs back in, I thought somebody was right behind me. Because I added carbs back in and then felt worse, gotta get back off the carbs. And I did that a couple times. I went right back to, crawling back to the carnivore diet. But I think the reality looking back now is the carnivore diet fucked me, made me way worse, probably gave me some level of fatty liver. And then after that, I was unable to handle basic carbohydrates, healthy foods. And that's kind of what I've been dealing with the last few months. And it's been really rough. I don't like throwing around the phrase rock bottom, but there were definitely points where that's what it felt like. But here we are. Last 2 weeks or so, there have definitely been some good indicators. Like it feels like the lights are coming back on in a way. Like I'm out here right now. It's about, I don't know, 12:30, 1 p.m. And I feel really good. I haven't had any semblance of crash. And I know this probably sounds really meaningless to most of you. And really silly that I'm even like talking about this and out in the fucking woods on a, random afternoon talking about this. But when you've dealt with intense chronic fatigue, I don't just mean you're sleepy. I don't just mean you need a day off. I mean intense, deep fatigue. When you've dealt with that for a long time, even having a day where you're just like, hey, I'm having those days where you like don't even really think about it that much. Like you're just kind of going and doing shit, just kind of going and doing work and going and hanging with my kids and my family and just kind of being like, sweet, I feel pretty solid. Like not even really thinking about it. Kind of strikes you in the evening. Unfortunately, when in the evenings, that's when my eye and kind of like some other issues seem to kind of like come out from hiding and attack again. But either way, last 2 weeks, it seems like the lights are coming back on. So that brings us to now. July 14th, 2025, about a month or two ago, USATF announced the standards for the 2028 marathon trials, which is my ultimate goal. 2:16 for men, which is what I expected. I had 2:15 in my head as like, that's what I'm gonna have to run to make the trials. So where am I at fitness-wise? I just said that, while I was on the carnivore diet kind of early this year, I actually had some decent workouts, had some decent training. Did some runs with a guy who ended up running about 240, what did he run, 245 in the marathon? And just based on like workouts, based on kind of where I was at, I was like, if I went and ran a marathon right now, I'd probably be in like 250. That might even be aggressive. Something like that shape. That's not even close. Not even close to 215. There's a galaxy between where I'm at right now. And that's as of like April. Right now, I can't run a mile, much less a marathon. I mentioned like the calf and Achilles stuff. It's been really interesting how that has correlated with the other kind of autoimmune stuff that I've been struggling with. And when that stuff goes up, the calf and Achilles, just general like tightness, stiffness, pain goes up. When that goes down, it goes down. It's really fascinating. But that unfortunately is still pretty bad. You'll not run for a month. For a month, it won't run a step. And yet I will go, just walk from the couch to the bathroom or something and feel like I have a tear in my calf. Like it's stuff that doesn't even make sense. It doesn't even make sense how that's possible. And yet that's kind of where I've been. But I'm back on the bike and having the energy to actually do bike rides, which feels amazing. And it's interesting. It's an interesting observation. My power is definitely high. Not that it's high, it's not that good, but it's higher than it was. I biked a few times while I was on the carnivore diet. And even though, again, those days I wasn't having symptoms, which again, now, like I said, I know was just hiding under the surface, my power was much higher now, which I attribute to just carbs. The miracle of carbs. Wow, glucose. Wow, the muscles need glucose. Oh my God. So, I'm not even fucking close. And I'm gonna be honest, in my situation, at my age, 35 years old, not fit to try to have, again, I have 2.5 years. It's roughly December, end of December 2027 to run to under 216. It's not very realistic, I won't lie. It's not very likely. Not only is it just rationally unlikely, I have a massive voice in my head that's just telling me like, fuck this. Just, you gave it a shot. You tried to get back. You tried to get back to the point where you could train at that level and do what needs to be done. But the reality is that it's almost certainly not gonna happen. But fuck that. fuck that, man. I want to do it, man. As stupid as it is, as foolish as it is, as almost certainly unlikely to happen as it is, I still am gonna give my best effort, man. And I think the reality is, as I'm filming this now, I realize that, you know, if you go through my channel, I don't have a lot of videos. And I know I don't have a ton of subscribers, but I do occasionally get messages from people asking how things are going. Like, I'm like, what the fuck? These people actually care? This is remarkable. It's not like a ton. It's not like 100 messages a day or anything, but it's like a fair amount of people asking me how things are going or saying, hey, I hope the comeback's going well. It's crazy. I'm so blown away by that. But if you go back through my videos, there's definitely a pattern. When I'm posting videos consistently, things are going well with my health. When I'm not, things are not. I looked back just earlier today and I was like, fuck, it's like an exact, you know, the way it follows that trend, that pattern. But what I realize is that when I'm not feeling well, I hide, you know, I hide. I don't see friends. I don't post videos. I don't see, you know, I only see my close family because, you know, I have 2 kids. I'm not just going to not see them. But I definitely hide. And that's something I want to stop doing. Like, I don't want to hide anymore. I don't want to hide. I don't want to be scared. I don't want to operate out of fear anymore. I want to, you know, put this out there and be willing to accept that I look like a doofus at first. Like, be willing to accept that, yeah, I've been posting videos about trying to come back to running for what, 3-4 years now, and yet I'm barely ahead of where I was when I started. That's fucking embarrassing as hell. And yet I don't want to operate out of fear. I don't want to be scared of that, scared of criticism, whatever. And the reality is, like, people, I know people on the internet can be pretty brutal, and yet, like, most people, especially in like the running community, man, most people in the running community are pretty fucking great. Like I highly doubt, maybe I'll get, you know, maybe like a troll friend of mine or something will write in the comments, you suck, whatever. But like, I highly doubt there's going to be anybody that's like, actually, you're, you know, blah, blah, blah. The reality is that, like I said, the running community is fucking awesome. And that's why I've been a part of it for coming up on 20 years, is because I love it so much and I never want to be apart from it, you know? And that kind of brings in a last thing I want to talk about, is that even though my own running has been a total dumpster fire, I'm actually coaching a lot of runners and it's going really, really well. I've just come to love it so much. You know, I worked for a company up from 2016 to 2024, same company for, 9 years, and got, you know, basically more or less let go in December of 2024. So unfortunately, kind of when all this was, you know, going pretty poorly too, it's been a rough year, been a rough several years for the family. But, you know, I have no ill will towards that company or towards its owner, Jeff. Like, no ill will at all. Like, love him, always will. But it definitely left me in a pretty tough spot because you know, the reality is I'm 35 years old. I think I'm pretty capable. I think I'm a reasonably smart guy. And yet I just have extremely niche experience. You know, my time at Runners Connect was very up and down. Heading into kind of like 2020, I was like, I mean, I'm not gonna lie. I was like, we're doing it. We did, like, we were growing fast. Like, things, you know, everything was looking great. I was like, we're actually doing it. The last 4 or 5 years are finally gonna pay off, and we're actually gonna become pretty big and, you know, maybe sell at some point. And unfortunately, COVID hit and completely annihilated our business model entirely, completely uprooted it, turned it over on its head. And we just never really worked back from that. We never really clawed our way back from that. We limped along, but we never really made that, got back on that trajectory that we were on before that. And anyway, that's all to say, even though I feel like I went through an MBA in my time at Runners Connect, I mean, dealt with like very tiny startup stuff where, you know, you're cleaning the toilets, cash flow problems, again, a global pandemic where our entire business model was fucked, like completely destroyed. Hiring, firing, I mean, dealt with all that. So even though I feel like, wow, I've got all this great experience, the reality is that it's very niche, and it's extraordinarily difficult to convey that to employers. Very tough. And maybe I'm just being a pussy, and maybe I'm just, or making excuses or whatever, but that's how I have felt in the time that I've tried to find work. And anyway, thankfully, after Runners Connect, really once I announced that I was leaving, it was incredible having people just reach out that either knew me from Runners Connect or through my own social media, reaching out, asking if I'd be coaching and if I'd be willing to coach them. I was like blown away by the amount of people that I would have asking me that. And I was like, absolutely, that sounds lovely. I would love to. Thinking at first that it was just gonna be a little kind of side thing, but now, that's been one thing that, even though it was pretty rough getting started at first, because you just don't have a lot of momentum, it actually is starting to pick up pretty good. And I'm getting referrals, word of mouth, people being like, hey, you coached this person. I would love for you to coach me too. It's just unbelievable how that's been, even though I've barely posted a single video for months now, really half a year, and barely been doing anything for it. I've still been having, and I'll tell you, it's been such a pleasure to be able to work with people like that and help them achieve their goals, help them change their lives. Right there, camera decided it's too hot out, said internal temp too hot, and I can't get it back on. So even though my own running has been, again, a dumpster fire, just not good, very little progress made, it's been very rewarding to be able to work with other people to help them achieve their goals. I mean, I'm coaching all the way from, someone who's 60 and trying to qualify for Boston down to, I've got some high schoolers that I'm working with, especially in the summer. During the year, it's kind of more of like an advisory role. But in the summer, I'm full on coaching some high schoolers, which is just so much fun, so rewarding. I've always enjoyed working with I'll work with anybody, any age, but I've always enjoyed working with younger people. High school kids, college. Maybe in another life I would have been a college coach, but it's been very rewarding, and I think that I'm glad to have that. I'm glad to be able to use my knowledge, expertise to, even if it doesn't help me get where I want to go, even if it hasn't anyway, to help other people get where they want to go. That's been incredibly rewarding. So what do we do now? I don't know if I would call this like a comeback video as much as it is kind of like a rock bottom video, but I set a goal, and one of the biggest things I talked about when I set that goal was that I wanted to follow through on it. I felt like there were things throughout my life that I have not followed through on, in particular when I qualified for the Olympic trials in college and didn't compete. That's stuff that I'm not going to say it like eats at me every day, but it's like, I don't like that about myself. I want to change that. And so I want to follow through on this one too. As unlikely as it is, as improbable, as almost certainly odds stacked against you, probably not going to happen as it is, I'm going to go for it, man. I still believe it. Maybe I'm just stupid. Maybe I'm just dumb, Maybe I'm just too dumb to realize that this isn't ever going to happen, but I still believe that it can happen. I still believe that I can run a 2:15 marathon within 2.5 years. So, like I said, I'm getting out of the shell. I'm going to stop retreating, stop being fearful, and start putting myself out there more. So, I'll call this day 0. Day 0 of the comeback. Here we go.